All right, well, thanks so much for coming out, guys, to the Arctic Refuge Defense Campaign press conference. My name is Jason, and we're all gathered here in support for the protection of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge from oil and gas development. The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is one of our country's and the world's most majestic wild spaces, comprised of over 19 million acres in northern Alaska. It has immense cultural and biological value. And drilling would take place on the coastal plain, which is a strip along the northern border that is known as the biological heart of the refuge. Not only is the refuge home to an amazing array of wildlife species such as polar bears, the porcupine caribou, musk oxen, Arctic wolves, and over 200 species of migratory birds, but it's also the home of the Guiche people who have been living sustainably in the region for thousands of years. The refuge drilling in the refuge would sacrifice this amazing biological and cultural value that it has. The debate has been over whether or not to drill in the Arctic has been raging for over 40 years. But in 2017, the tax bill included a mandate that opened the refuge for drilling, and ever since then, the Trump administration, the Department of the Interior, has been barreling forward with a plan that ignores the climate, cultural, and biological damage that drilling would cause in the rapidly warming Arctic. In just last month, the Trump administration released its final environmental impact statement. This statement includes, or would open the refuge for selling oil and gas leases, and includes no meaningful protections for the land. It disregards traditional knowledge and testimony of the Guiche people, and underestimates the impacts that drilling would have on iconic species like polar bears and the porcupine caribou. Furthermore, the economic benefits of drilling in the Arctic have been far overstated. What was once thought to be over $1 billion in federal and state revenue is now thought to be closer to $40 million. Not to mention that for oil companies, drilling in the Arctic would be a logistical and public relations nightmare. The American people were promised a robust and scientifically sound review process with full tribal consultation, and yet actions speak louder than words, and the Trump administration has repeatedly cut corners at every step in this process. It has disregarded the voices of scientists, indigenous peoples, and activists. Just on September 12th, the House of Representatives passed a bill, the Arctic Cultural and Coastal Plain Protection Act, that restored many of the meaningful protections that were stripped away in 2017. But this bill has little to no chance of passing the Senate or being signed by the President. So we're gathered here today, this coalition of 15 businesses and organizations that represent the Upper Valley's corporate, business, and environmental communities, to show our support for the protection of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. This coalition, along with the 875 individual petitions that we've gathered over the last few weeks, are representative of the widespread support that the Upper Valley has around protecting the Arctic Refuge. So my name is Jason. I work for the Arctic Refuge Defense Campaign, which is a coalition of major environmental groups like Sierra Club, Greenpeace, the Alaska Wilderness League, as well as native organizations, church groups, and a whole range of organizations that truly care about protecting the Arctic Refuge. Our goal here in the Upper Valley is to raise awareness and build support around protecting the refuge, and to show and demonstrate to our public officials, presidential candidates, and oil companies that we will not stand for having our wild spaces be sacrificed for short-term profit. And so I want to introduce our first speaker, Carol Guise of the Upper Valley Sierra Club, who has been an advocate on this issue for a number of years. Carol?
Hello. I am going to speak on the issues that relate to the Gwich'in people near the within the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and I'll have to turn the page over in a minute, so I'll have to put the mic down. About 10 years ago, I attended a New Hampshire Sierra Club event in Concord. Its focus was on the life of the Gwich'in people of the Arctic and the importance of preserving their land and their way of life that is threatened by the potential of oil drilling in the Arctic coastal plain, which is part of the Arctic Refuge. I met several of the Gwich'in leaders who spoke of their concerns of losing their sustainable life, which has continued for over 20,000 years and is one of the last sustainable cultures on Earth. In addition, I viewed a film called Oil on Ice that depicted the past and present conditions of the oil industry's impact to the west of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and its potential permanent harm to the coastal plain and the cycle of life, connecting the people and wildlife in the region. I was so moved, and then some years later, I asked the Alaska Wilderness League to facilitate bringing down one of the Gwich'in leaders to Hanover for a week of 15 gatherings in the Upper Valley and the University of Vermont, so that we could learn about the Gwich'in life and support its continuity. The Gwich'in people depend on the migrating porcupine caribou herd for food, tools, clothing, shelter, and more. They are connected to the spirit of the migrating herd of 140,000 caribou that migrate in an arc of about 15,000 miles, 1,500 miles, that brings them to the coastal plain of the refuge every summer. It's on the coastal plain, about 40,000 calves are born and nurtured before the next migration to the wintering ground farther south. The connection of the Gwich'in people to the caribou is so vital that they call the coastal plain the sacred land where life begins. According to Peter Van Tyne of Trustees for Alaska, what the drill it all politicians don't realize is that the Gwich'in are a part of the Arctic ecosystem. If the coastal plain is drilled in the heart of the caribou's calving grounds, they're drilling in the heart of these people. That is why this is a human rights as well as an environmental issue. Seismic exploration for oil on the coastal plain occurred in the late 1980s. There are still scars all over the plain from that invasive explosive environment. With the climate change impacting the Arctic region, the herds might take other routes, but the reality is that the proposed seismic exploration now and eventual drilling of the coastal plain will not only disturb the wildlife and the source of food for the Gwich'in people, it will also potentially only provide 6 months of oil supply. It will take 10 years for its development, and it will destroy the sustainable life that has been in the life of the Gwich'in people for generations. Consider how the destruction of the buffalo herds impacted the life of the native people. The destruction of the buffalo herds impacted the life of the native people on our wild western lands. In 1987, there was a treaty agreement between the United States and Canada to preserve the caribou herd that migrates between the countries and provide sustenance for the Gwich'in people. They have the inherent right to continue their way of life, and that right is recognized and affirmed by civilized nations in an international covenant on human rights. Article 1 reads, in part, quote, "In no way may a people be deprived of their own means of subsistence. It's up to us to help preserve the Gwich'in people's sustainable life by permanently preserving the coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge and its caribou herd. It is their source of subsistence and survival that will preserve their spiritual bond and connection to the land and its wildlife into future generations." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. That was wonderful. I want to introduce Malia Wenzel of the Dartmouth Aurora Alaska Culture Club. So I'll take that sign from you. Wonderful.
Can I steal all that from you? As wildlife refuges, national parks, and national forests have been established throughout Alaska, Native people of the state have constantly asked, why is this land being held by the United States and not given back to us? The answer we have received has always been to protect the land and wildlife. We begrudgingly agreed or were forced to give up these lands. We had the understanding that these plots of land would be home for our traditional foods and medicines, that these would be places where our fish could swim unpoisoned, our caribou untraded, and our soil unpolluted. But we are resilient, for we have learned how to operate in this system. We have continued our traditional way of life hand in hand with the protected land systems for decades. But now, there are factions of people telling us that this land should be opened up for desecration, that we should shave the land to make room for oil camps and open it up to pump out oil. We did not have our land taken from us simply so it could be destroyed to turn a profit. Drilling and mining companies continuously make the promise that they will repair the damage done to the ecosystem when they are finished extracting what they want, but this is rarely true. Even if they magically found a way to undo the irreparable damage to the land, they could not undo the damage that Arctic drilling does to the environment and to the climate. The carbon and other greenhouse gases released from the damaged and melted permafrost caused by extractive industries will only dismantle our traditional way of life more. I am a traditional harvester from the Tlingit tribe. I'm also 21 years old. I've only been harvesting for a quarter of my life, or what I hope will only be a quarter of my life. But even in those short 18-ish years that I remember, I have seen drastic changes. My village, located in a national rainforest, has been in a drought for over a year. Where we used to get feet and feet of snow, we now only get inches. The plants that I have harvested my entire life, that feed me and my family and guide our sense of time throughout the year, are changing in ways that we can't understand. The salmon, which we have survived off of since time immemorial, are dying in waves because their ocean and rivers are getting too hot. My tribe has stories of surviving off the land during the last ice age. That is how long we have been living with the land. It is our right to continue living with the land and to make new stories for those who come after us. Drilling in Anwar is a violation of that right. Your temporary money is not worth our permanent damage. We have lived in our homeland for over 10,000 years, and we plan to live there for 10,000 years more. Gunashish, thank you.
Thanks so much, Malia. Oh, maybe take one of those back. I want to introduce Jean Gerber of East of Thetford. She's talk a bit more about her experiences in the Arctic.
Thank you. This past summer, I spent a month canoeing through the migratory lands of the porcupine caribou herd. Most of that was on the Porcupine River. And as I'm on the river, I can look up into the steep mountainsides and see the caribou trails etched into the land from thousands of years of travel, of migration of the caribou as they're traveling from their winter grounds up to the northern grounds and that coastal plain of the calving grounds of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And this is this river, the Porcupine River, is the river that the porcupine caribou herd, which is the largest barren ground caribou herd, it's named after this river because this is the river they travel over in the fall and the spring migration. We began our trip in the southern regions of the winter grounds of the caribou, and then we traveled up north up into the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. The reason the caribou travel up to the northern regions onto the coastal plains is because that area there is a safe grounds for them to give birth, because the mosquitoes can be devastating to to the calves and to the mothers as they're giving birth. If you imagine horses, how they have the flies on their faces, and how people who own horses want to protect the horses from the flies, and the way the ticks are destroying the population of the moose in New England. This is very similar with the mosquitoes attacking the caribou. When they're up on the coastal region there, it's a flat plain, there's no plants, and they're getting the cool breezes from the Beaufort Sea, and that's protecting them from the mosquitoes. When a mother is giving birth, whether it's a human or a animal, they need safety, they need quiet, and they need that protection. And this land, this coastal land, is a very small area of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, but it's also the only land of that refuge that's not permanently protected from drilling. They need that land. All the caribou, the barren ground caribou, are going up there to converge to give birth, and if you can imagine roads being built there and 90,000-pound trucks coming there, seismic testing, shaking the ground, facilities being built for workers, trash, sewage, the caribou wouldn't be able to go there to give birth. And there is no other place in that area for them to give birth, because the rest of the region is mountainous. It has taller plants. They can't see predators coming. So it's vital to protect that land. When I was in Old Crow, the Gwich'in village, Old Crow, on the Porcupine River, evidence of the caribou, how they live with the caribou, what the caribou is to their culture is everywhere. People want to come up to you and they talk to you about the caribou. They want to tell you about what it looks like when the caribou swim across the Porcupine River. And they tell us that people don't even know we exist here. You go into the community buildings and there are children's posters of caribou and how caribou are our life, that it's our food, it's our tools, it's our craft, it's our clothing, and it's been like this for thousands, 10,000s of years. When I was there was a young woman who wanted to take me over to the computer and show me evidence of their recent findings of the caribou fences that their people used to use tens of thousands of years ago to hunt the caribou. This caribou their lives are intertwined with the caribou. If there is drilling up in the calving grounds, it can destroy the population of the caribou, and it can destroy the Gwich'in people's culture and their lifestyles. And this must stop. It must not even be started. Climate change is already taking its toll on the caribou, but this is something that we can stop. And we ask them, what can we do to help? What can we do down here in the States to help? And they say, you have to talk about it. Tell people. They have hope that this can be changed. They said, we need people's voices. Talk to your representatives. And so I encourage people to contact your representatives and sign petitions. It's called the 1002 lands because it's some legal article, that's the number of this document, but that refers to the calving grounds. We really need to prevent any testing for drilling in that area. So please do what we can and talk about it and sign petitions and contact your representatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. And finally, I want to wrap up with Kim Quirk of Revision Energy. There you go.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Kim Quirk, the Upper Valley Branch Manager of Revision Energy. We are an employee-owned and certified B Corp with a mission, a business with a mission to help reduce or eliminate the fossil fuels in people's homes, businesses, in our schools, and in the municipalities. Oil and gas drilling in the Arctic Refuge will exacerbate climate change. It threatens the indigenous rights, and it ruins one of America's last wild habitats. More importantly, it's also bad for business. Not more importantly, but it is bad for business. We know that every drop of oil that we extract from the ground brings us closer and closer to the point at which we will not recognize the planet we are currently living in. We need to put the brakes on further climate change by leaving all of the remaining fossil fuels in the ground. It's unfair, and I think it's scary to think that we are prioritizing the wishes of a dirty fuel business over the lives and the land of the Arctic Refuge. We know from the research of many scientists that we don't need that oil. We have the technology, we have the labor, we have the parts to build solar, wind, and other renewable projects that can replace all of that oil. We don't need that oil. Today, my company, Revision Energy, employs over 250 permanent full-time people in New Hampshire and Maine and Massachusetts, but we're just one of many solar installers in the companies all over the U.S. According to the DOE's 2017 U.S. Energy and Employment Report, solar employment accounts for the largest share of workers in the electric power generation sector, 374,000. Oil, coal, and natural gas combined support only half that many, about 187,000. Solar and renewables are a good business. For each person that we don't deploy to drill in the Arctic Refuge, we can hire 2 people in their own hometowns to deploy solar panels and help preserve that wildlife and preserve the way of life for the people in the Arctic. We need to promote and encourage the use of locally installed, locally generated energy, and it also helps to build our local economies and our local businesses. We don't need to take any more oil out of the ground. We don't need to ruin people's lives and their land, and we do need to encourage good business practices. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kim, so much. So that about wraps it up for us here. We're happy to take questions if you have any, but I want to thank you again so much for coming out, and yeah, absolutely.